Hey, Scott Jordan and Mark Warner here for Jancast number 160 for January 4th, Thursday, 2024. And 2024. Did you hear that, Mark?
Some bell is kind of ringing. Didn't something happen in 2004?
Yes, that's right. This is the 20th anniversary of our first year of Jancast, which is, you researched this, so I'll let you put this factoid out there.
So Brides Magazine.
Which they follow us on Jancast.
Well, listen, I Googled it and it gave me that as a reference, but says that this is the Emerald anniversary.
Okay.
And that's the stone, but it could also be referred to potentially as the Platinum anniversary, apparently, as the medal of choice for 20 years. Who knew?
There you go.
If you're looking for information on that, apparently Brides Magazine is.
And in case anybody doesn't know it, we are the longest running podcast that subject matter relates specifically to the janitorial industry. And we started it in 2004, and then we won the Innovation Award in 2005. And that was back before people even knew what a podcast was. Actually, I guess we called it a podcast at the beginning, right? Was it called? Yeah, I don't remember.
Yep. Jancast, podcasting to a cleaner world.
Yep.
And now it's podcasting to a cleaner and healthier world because we've put the concern of health in.
That's right. So not only is this a great show because it's 20 years, but this is our prediction show for 2024. And this allows us next year to go back and review our predictions that we were going to make today. But we made some predictions back in 23, didn't we?
We did in early part of 23. We made some predictions as it related to innovative technology that was actually supposed to change the world and shift it on its axis and eliminate any kind of climate disharmony. And they were called electrostatic sprayers. But we predicted that they weren't going to be able to do all those things.
That's right, because they didn't work. That's why, Mark. Hey, I'm sorry. I got to be the person that says it. And we've said it many times before. I feel bad for all those people that have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of those green sprayers in their warehouse because, that company, I don't need to mention the name, but everybody knows what we're talking about. Maybe you could use them as a plant mister or something like that,
Is that a tip?
Yeah, you get the wrap effect around your rhododendrons and stuff when you're spraying it outside, because otherwise I don't know what you're going to do with it. But that's enough bashing of the electrostatic spray.
Actually, there is news on that individually they were very, very expensive, but now on the internet we find that they're cheaper by the dozen. So
if somebody can figure out how to turn one into a drill, then you probably sell them like hotcakes. But okay, back to the show. So we're talking about what's going to happen in.
So wait a minute, though. We do have to lay claim, though,
that
the prediction of 2023 was accurate.
That's right. That's right. So
now everybody wants to know, what are your predictions for 2024?
That's right. Okay, so we got technology going along the lines of the electrostatic sprayers. What big technology is going to change the cleaning industry this year? Now, we already talked, we've had many interviews with a couple different companies in last year and before that on robotics. I think that's going to be killer. I mean, you know more about the robotics thing than I do, but I think it's going to be big time.
Yeah, I agree with that completely.
Yep.
Especially when they can put a maid skirt on it and start calling them Rosie, like the Jetsons. At that point, everybody's going to have their own robot, even in their homes.
That's right.
But yeah, I see it as John Hill actually spoke to that quite a bit, that people didn't really know how to integrate robots into their workloading. And he's put together some really sophisticated thoughts regarding how to workload a robot into a team, and I think that's what it needed.
Yeah. Well, I was at the giant supermarket last night, and there's this thing that roams around the store, beeping, and it's got this heavy bass, and it's got this blinking thing on the top of it. And I stopped the thing, and I said, "Yo, dude, what are you doing?" And it didn't answer me, so I don't know what it was doing. But you see that at your supermarket?
Yeah. So the thing the thing that I was always concerned about, Scott, is that when you're running an auto scrubber, you're filling a 20-gallon solution tank, and a 20-gallon or more
Yeah,
recovery tank is on board, so that you're cleaning with fresh water as you go.
yep.
And there's hardly enough room for a quart of water on that thing you're just describing. So
I think it's
what is
checking
it really,
stock, isn't it?
what is it doing?
I think it's checking inventory. I don't know what it's doing.
Maybe so. It doesn't really, I think
I
it
have
was
to go in
supposed to
and
be
ask, and
cleaning
I'll
floors,
report
but
on future shows. But if they can, I mean, everybody's getting kind of used to it. So I mean, that's part of the other problem is, people don't know what to do with them, but they're also hesitant to put them in their facilities because it's new, right? So if I'm getting used to this thing walking around the supermarket, I guess I could get used to auto scrubbers doing the same thing.
so literally the latest that I've seen on robotics coming out of really out of Europe and Far East is they're really trying to make them more animated, more human-like, and they're creating these kind of molded faces.
Yeah.
So I think that's what we're going to see in the future, is a little bit more of an adoption to making them look more like a living thing, whether it's a person or whether it's a small little thing they want to make look like a dog. I'm not sure, but that's kind of where that seems to be going. So that's prediction number one, that robotics was going to not only uh, accelerate in its popularity, but they're going to make them seem a little more lifelike, whether it's animal-like or human-like.
Right. Yeah.
We did a show 6 months ago that was about bathroom cleaning robotics,
Yeah.
and the one at hands, it actually used a toilet bowl brush to clean it. So
That seemed kind of a lot of effort. Just seems like you should be able to do that a little easier than a hand doing a bowl mop, But
it does it. Yeah, you're
yeah,
right for
yeah.
sure.
Well, we got some other stuff. We got
Well, other predictions.
yes, this is hey, I believe this is our product. So I'm predicting this is going to be even a bigger hit than it already is. So let's, it just wasn't introduced at the beginning of last year. So we could say, okay, 2024 is the year of fragrance-free odor control. And why do we care about that, Mark?
Well, there's a lot of reasons that got started down that path regarding certain types of odors that tend to stand out when a perfume is added
Yeah,
to odor counteractant, things like flavored tobacco and pot smoke and things like that. But as it turns out, the medical community, the healthcare community, has been concerned for years about the fear that people might be using a heavily perfumed product to perhaps mask an underlying problem. And it raises concerns. And OSHA's talked about it. The Joint Commission has talked about it. And their recommendation is to figure out ways to deal with odor problems without adding fragrances and perfumes to the airspace. So, Scott, I think they were singing our song when they said that, because that's been the direction of the newest technology in the AirX line, is a fragrance.
And we'll put a link to the document that covers the Joint Commission and the OSHA position on that. And it's no different than FDA's had the same thing in place forever in food processing areas. You can only use deodorizers with fragrances and stuff in bathroom areas. They do not allow you to use it in the meat processing area or where the actual food processing is going on, for the exact same reason they assumed back then, and this was 20, 30 years ago, they put in place that they don't want to be covering up foul, rotting meat odors with, cherry deodorizers or something. So it's the same concept, but taking
No, that creates just an image, but okay.
yeah. So yeah, it's pretty interesting, but we'll put a link in there for info on our product as well as the data that's behind it. And then we got the whole M&A thing that hasn't.
Well, before we jump on that,
Go ahead.
because that's a prediction, but I did want to kind of throw out there as it links into robotics, and cleaning specifically. And that is, one of the trends that's coming along is people doing, let's call it desktop management. It's all about the Internet of Things, and everything that people are working with, their tools, their equipment, their dispensers, all wired to a desktop platform with multiple screens where somebody's literally able to manage what's happening within their facility by
Yeah.
looking at a desktop and seeing the amount of hand soap that exists in the hand
Yeah.
soap
Yeah,
dispensers
whether or
or
not they need to
toweling
run
and
out and
tissue. And
put toilet paper in the cubicles or what? Yeah.
where I see it the most is people using that to monitor cleaning tasks. So we have maybe a program that's set up to have a certain task frequency for cleaning a bathroom or cleaning a floor, or cleaning a carpet or whatever, and using this internet as a communication device allows a facility manager to literally look at multiple screens and say, yep, we're on track with our task frequency assignments. And I think that's going to become really, really big in this year, especially because those questions arise between facility managers and service providers.
Yeah.
Is the question is are we getting the task frequencies that we wanted to get? Are we providing the ones we promised to provide? And so with those questions becoming more and more frequent, I think that concept of the Internet of Things, dashboard driven, data driven management systems for cleaning is also going to spike.
Yeah.
So I wanted to throw that out there while we
Yeah.
were talking about cleaning in the robotics, because the robotics already have integrated with them the communication ability to communicate with a desktop manager, for example, and all the other companies that are doing toweling and tissue and hand soap dispensers, even they're starting all that communication.
Well, it kind of takes you back to, you remember day cleaning? That was a big thing for a while there, kind of died off. But one of the pluses on day cleaning is the cleaners that you wouldn't normally see because they're cleaning at night could actually ask somebody, hey, have you actually used that meeting room in the last whatever period of time? Where nowadays with the analytics, they could say, no, that room hasn't even been opened in 48 hours. Leave that off the list. Where back in day cleaning days, it would be Bob would ask Shirley, hey, do you need your office cleaned? And she said, no, it's fine. But now with all the data-driven stuff, somebody could make those decisions without even talking to anybody.
I remember Ian Gregg actually came
Yeah.
here to our offices
Yep.
to do a training on day cleaning and saying this was a trend. Where I think it did have traction and where it still exists is as it relates to cordless versus battery powered
Yeah.
equipment like vacs and so on. I think that's what created the traction
Yeah.
for that kind of equipment, was the concept of day cleaning. And then obviously 9/11 2001 was the start of a changeover into making sure buildings were highly secured and not left wide open overnight. And that's why
Yeah.
day cleaning also picked up that
Yeah.
traction.
Okay, well, the next one is, what do we think about the M&A situation? Is
All
it going
right,
to
so
continue?
we can't be throwing around just acronyms, Scott.
I'm
We
sorry.
have to explain what that means. Because I've said that to people and they'll go, M and what? Isn't that a candy?
Mergers
And
and
it's like, no,
acquisitions.
yes.
Mergers and acquisitions. So what do you think? I mean, you have in our notes the difference between the East Coast companies buying the West Coast companies. It was kind of leaning towards the West Coast companies buying more of the East Coast. Now, maybe swapping a little, switching a little bit.
Yeah, it's interesting because we're seeing a lot of the acquisitions, were big companies regionally on either the East Coast
Yeah.
or the West Coast.
Yep.
So we're talking about companies like Imperial Dade on the East Coast, which has purchased over 70 different companies. Most of them really were pretty much East Coast based. And then Brady and Waxy at one point were separate and they were doing a lot of acquisitions, but a lot of them were just on the West Coast. And Brady acquired Waxy. And so then you have these two kind of behemoths, giants. And it appears right now that what we're seeing is the major interest in these large behemoths trying to make sure they're bi-coastal. So you've got the West Coast, Brady IFS looking at East Coast acquisitions, and the East Coast Imperial Dade looking at West Coast acquisitions. And I think that's trying to spread their platforms out as a uniform national bi-coastal kind of platform. And that's surprising to me, because I think they both lose a little strength with the fact that we've got to ship stuff. You know, you end up with a little bit more strength when you can operate primarily within your own backyard.
Yeah.
You know, farm your crops on your own farm rather than in Chile. You know, so there's some economies there of being able to be somewhat concentrated force within a regional platform. But if they are planning, and here's the big if, Scott, if they're planning to go intercontinental, then suddenly North America becomes their own backyard, and maybe that's
well, they have gone. Imperial Dade's bought a couple in Canada, right? I think.
Yep.
Yeah. So the
Yep,
more
but
important question. So the prediction is it going to continue, or are, I mean, the whole goal here, I'm not an economist, but this only makes sense if they can flip these big businesses, because otherwise, why are they doing it? It's all venture capital back, so they need to make their money back. So at some point, one of these big guys has to sell out to somebody even bigger, or somebody with more money. So the prediction is it going to keep going these little piecemeal things? Which I wouldn't say piecemeal is probably not the best way to describe it, because we're talking about a lot of money. But is that going to continue, or are we going to see some sort of slowdown and then finally some sort of logical end game on this? So what do you think?
So I think it's going to continue at a slower pace, and I don't think we're going to see the end game be reached in 2024.
Oh,
I
interesting.
think they're going to slow first, because it was on such a fast accelerating path of acquisitions. And we are seeing it start to slow down now, which means that it'll start to slow further. And at that point, since money's not changing hands in the form of M&As, that's when it becomes very appealing to flip that. And I'm not sure that that would be accomplished in 2024. But I suspect that we'll talk about this in January of 2025, and we may have a different opinion as to how close we are to the end game.
Well, I'm gonna go.
What's your thought?
I'm going out on the ledge. I'm gonna say one of the two big guys, Imperial Dade or Brady, one of those two is going to be sold, I predict, to somebody else
In 2024.
in 2020.
Well,
One
Scott,
of the two. Mark it down,
so
and we'll talk about it next year.
So for the record, I won't be stunned if you're right about that, because you have an knack for those kind of predictions. But I'll go on the record as 2025 is that.
Yeah, it has been going on for a while. So at some point, somebody's got to make some of this money back. That's because I don't think the companies by themselves necessarily are generating a huge amount of profits, because they're still all operating independently in most cases. So, well, enough said. We made our prediction, right?
Yep. And another prediction that I know you've been really a huge fan of is AI.
Yep.
So, Scott, what's your prediction on what happens with AI in 2024?
Everybody that knows about it and been following with ChatGPT and some of the other ones, Bard and all those, the cool thing that's coming down the road is, imagine this, and I think this will, I'm predicting that we'll probably be able to do this at Bullen with some of our brands. So what the process, if you're not familiar with it, is the computer software has the ability to digest huge amounts of data. Up until now, that data has come either from the internet up to a certain date. The newer ones are now going into the current internet, versus previously some of the ChatGPT stuff was stopped at a certain year. But the cool thing is creating a LLM, which is called a large language model. That's the database that you've got. So imagine Bullen being able to take our, let's say for our odor control brand, Aerex. We have the large language model ingest all of our product data sheets. which talks about how you use the product, what it's for, the directions, the dilution rate, pH, safety data sheets, all that stuff for the 150 products we've got in that one brand get digested. Then, instead of searching through ChatGPT for the whole world, you're searching through ChatGPT specifically in the AirX large language model. So that means this AI could essentially answer almost any technical question as long as we've covered it within those sheets. So that's specific to us. And then everybody else can, I mean, they're talking about doing it with doctors' records, the same thing, stock advice. But instead of being this huge kind of database, you're very focused on it. So that's my prediction for AI. Bullen will have a ChatGPT driven by our own data in 2024. There you go.
Wow.
That's a rock.
That's
Okay,
a
the next
home
one's
run.
the next one's right up your alley, Mark. Then we got to close this out because we've been going for a while, even though we're having fun. So, are we going to see another COVID crisis in 2024, Mark?
All right, so we are. It's just going to be slightly different, and we've got the new JN1 variant that's out there, and it's extremely contagious. I've had personal interaction with a number of hospitals, as you know, and the one hospital was telling me about their emergency room. Normally, they can handle almost 70 people in their ER at a time.
Wow.
And over the last 2 weeks, they've been at 400 with
400.
people waiting 400, trying to come through the ER. So what's happening is the fact that it is so contagious. The good news is that it's not as lethal as COVID when it first came out, but it has become very, very contagious. So in reality, Scott, we're going to live with it. Instead of being a pandemic, it's going to be called endemic, meaning it's part of our lives, just like the common cold, just like the every year flu.
Yep.
We got the SARS-CoV-2 flu, COVID flu, and the regular flu, and the common cold. And those are things that we're just going to be worried about for years to come. The other thing that's part of this trifecta is RSV, respiratory syncytial virus. And that one is bothersome because it is primarily targeted towards the respiratory system, the lungs. And if you remember when COVID first came around,
Yeah, that was a big
that's
problem.
what made it so lethal, is it targeted the lungs. So RSV is a unique virus that just targets lungs, and that's why they're so concerned about it. Now, when it raised its ugly head over the course of this last year specifically, it was because young kids and older geriatrics were succumbing to this RSV. And I remember you and I had to figure out how to even say respiratory syncytial virus. Now, you hear correspondents on TV just ripping it off like they're saying days of the week. It's become everyday language. But I think that trifecta of COVID and its variants, the trifecta of the flu, and then RSV, are things that we're going to track year after year after year. So, yeah, I think it's still going to be around. And I think every time we have these holidays that causes mass gatherings, we're going to see explosive spreading of disease. So that's here in the US. In China, for example, they went through a zero tolerance policy where everybody was locked down. And as soon as they unlocked the doors, all of a sudden they had a flash. So apparently it does have to make its way through our bodies so our bodies can make the antibodies to fight it off. It reminds me of Tom Cruise in the movie War of the Worlds.
That's right. Don't go in the basement with a crazy guy. Yeah.
Well, that's not where I was going with that, but that was a good scene. But it's the tiniest things that actually become the largest form of defense.
Yep.
That is our own antibodies.
I got the last one, a little controversial, but is this the year that the ISSA show has jumped the shark? And by defining jump shark would be it's no longer what it was before. So You go first, Mark, and I'll put my opinion out there.
Well, I think that there's been some dynamic changes in the platform itself.
Yep.
You know, I've talked with a lot of people that have noticed that where it was originally designed to be a platform for the supply chain, for manufacturers to talk to distributors and educate them so the distributors could educate the end users. By making the change into the end user platform and kind of being the umbrella overall, the makeup of the attendees has been dominated by end users rather than supply chain. So
Right.
I think that starts a chain of events that changes the whole platform a little bit. And my biggest concern about that is whether it weakens the need for the multi-tiered supply chain,
Yeah, good
which
point.
would be disheartening because you know, you and I kind of grew up in the world of multi-tiered supply chains.
Yeah.
So, but maybe that's a sign of the world changing, Scott, not just Jansan.
Yeah. Well, with all the M&As going on, it's certainly no longer a distributor show because there aren't as many distributors as there used to be. So now all those 70 or so, if you're just talking about Imperial Date, that's 70 less potential distributors you need to talk to because those 70 distributors they don't make buying decisions in most cases. So my opinion is it's going to be a very difficult time for the show, just because it's going to have to make this transition for it to be viable. And then they have other issues like the fact that it's in the same place each year for multiple years, which that kind of changes people's enthusiasm for going if it's the same place where if you had two locations, at least you could say, well, I don't like that first location, but I'm definitely going to go next year because it's in the other location. Where if it's all in the same place, it's kind of like, well, geez, it's the same place. It's the same time period as it was last year. So I think that's, there's smarter people managing it than us, obviously, because we're not in the show business, the trade show business. But I think it's going to be very interesting to look back on this in 2025 and see what's it like. So I don't think it's going to end, but it's a very serious time period for the show in general, as to whether or not it's going to make that transition. So, hey, well, I just have to sit back for the rest of the year and wait and see what happens, right? We are going to the show. We are exhibiting next year. After that, can't say. I don't know. We'll have to
Yeah,
see.
so we're doing our part to help.
Yeah, if we could just fly in like some of our associates and go to the show for a day, I'd do that in a second. But we can't do that as an exhibitor, right?
No, well, no, they frown on empty booths.
Yeah. Well, a good show. I think it'll be very interesting to look at this a year from now and say, boy, we were right on line, or we were completely off, or whatever. And then it'll be a nice tradition each year to set expectations for what's coming in the future, right, Mark?
I agree. Well, the tradition will be a prediction show, the first show of every year from here moving forward. So
well,
in the year
thanks.
2054, we'll be looking back at this and talking about it. Maybe.
Well, thanks for everybody tuning in, and hope everybody had a great New Year's, and looking forward to a great 2024. Our business has really rebounded here, so we're thinking it's going to continue. So thanks to everybody, and thank you, Mark, for another year of shows.
And thank you all for being avid Jancast.com listeners.
Thank you. Okay, see y'all.
Catch you later.